Sara Elbadwi here from Horse Racing Nation, joined by Jason Beem, track announcer, handicapper, podcast host. What do you not do?
Honestly, I don't do a lot of handicapping, so this is kind of exciting for me, at least in a public sense. I do it in for my own enjoyment and stuff, but I don't often get to be the handicapper. I'm often the host, so I'm excited for this.
All right, well, good. I'm glad that we're adding a little variety to your quite broad spectrum of handicapping content in general. And you and I are going to be talking about the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. This year, we had some horses that were kind of eyeing this race rather than going to the sprint and facing a monster or going to the classic and facing a monster over there. What do you think about this race in general and the field of 11 that we have assembled?
Well, I think it looks a little top heavy in terms of how it's going to get bet. I think there's three or four that are going to be kind of logical types. I It's not really tucked into the main bets of the day, I think, for people. The late pick five, the pick six, stuff like that. It does end the early pick five, which has some of the undercard races, which I guess is kind of interesting. And I, as a general rule, I always think that when there's not a flight line in the final leg of a pick five, that people tend to go, and actually with flight line, they're going to do, but they tend to go more narrow as the sequence goes on. So I think this is a race in the early pick five where people might be trying to go a little bit narrow, especially if those early races are somewhat competitive. I know Golden Pal is in that sequence as well, so he might be kind of the early pick five single for a lot of folks, and maybe they can spread a little bit more in the dirt mile. But there's kind of a funny thing in this race where it seems like there's three or four horses who all have gotten very good the second half of the year, and who were good before, but it seems like their figures and their efforts just kind of leaped forward in this second half. Cody's Wish, Gunite, Laurel River, all kind of follow that pattern a little bit, that they've all run three big races in a row coming into this in big numbers for them.
I agree. These are the horses that are improving at the right time. One of them that you mentioned, Gunite, he just ran 2 weeks ago and he's wheeling back very quickly for trainer Steve Asmussen. He's doing this with another horse in Wicked Halo in a different Breeders' Cup race. This horse is 7-2 as the second choice, a 3-year-old facing older, and here gets that nice post position of post number 5. And some of the data that we have at Horse Racing Nation looks at the post positions as well as where horses are early on in a race, if they're early pressing types, if they're stalkers, if they're coming from off the pace as closers. And the mile distance is probably one of the most biased distances at Keeneland. And basically you just don't want to be outside. So that's kind of my process for going through this race is I took the horses from post 8 through 11 and I crossed them out. And then I took the horses that have yet to run a triple digit Beyer speed figure in their career and I crossed them out. And then I was left with four horses in Pipeline, Gunite, Laurel River, and Cody's Wish as the serious contenders for this race.
So three of the four top choices then.
Yes.
Well, one thing I thought is important to talk about with this race is the distance, because it's a little bit of an unusual trip. They don't run at Keeneland very often, right? I don't know that they ever run the flat dirt mile. So they start at the finish line. Keeneland is a mile and a 16th oval, I believe. Yeah, a mile and a 16th oval. So they start at the finish line, finish at the 16th pole. So it is a short stretch race, but the run up is 210 feet. So it's 70 yards. So they're effectively running a mile and 70. And for me, Gunite distance is a major question, right? So he's not even going a mile. He's going a mile and 70, even though, it's run up. And I saw some people on Twitter like, oh, it doesn't count. I was like, they're still running it. It's just not timed.
it's not
And so,
imaginary.
no, so I think that's an important part of the equation, especially with a horse like that. Because there's a few horses like this that have not gone this distance, or especially have not gone two turns. And Gunite, I believe, is one of those who has never run two turns. And Cody's Wish, I think, has only done it once, and that was at Tampa, and he got beat.
Right. And with Gunite, I have written down if this was a 7 furlongs, I'd love him, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's at a mile, and it's really technically a mile and 70 yards, like you so shrewdly mentioned. And so his only time going beyond that 7 furlong distance was an off the board finish, and it was his only off the board finish. Granted, that was in the Grade 1 Champagne as a 2-year-old, and he's
Yeah.
obviously an improved horse since then. So I don't want to hold it against him too much. But for a horse that's the second choice going into such a star-studded field like this, as a 3-year-old facing older for the first time, do you really want the horse that has yet to prove that he can handle going further? I don't.
Yeah, I'd hate, I never have handicapping rules or stuff like that, but one of the things I try to avoid is horses doing something or multiple things for the first time or trying to do them successfully for the first time at short prices. It's one thing if he was 15 to 1 and we're having this conversation, because then you have a horse who's likely to be on or very close to the lead, who's got some serious talent. And if, maybe the one time they hold him off out of 10, if I'm getting 15 to 1 on that, now I'm really interested in it. But he's not going to be that price. And another thing that's kind of tricky, but I guess we'll have one day of it. We're only going to get one day of, kind of knowing how the dirt course is playing when it comes to Keeneland, because they're running at Churchill on Wednesday and Thursday. And so, um, I suppose watching on Friday will be somewhat important, and watching early on Saturday as well to see how the course is playing.
Definitely. Obviously, this is a track that we've seen favor those speed type horses. And of the shorter priced top 3 that I deduced so effectively, I am going with Pipeline actually as
Hmm.
my top pick in here. He is 8 to 1 versus some of those shorter prices on horses. So I feel as though a fair price in a field like this. And mainly I went to this horse because he has only run 3 times this year. But he has success at the mile, which a lot of these other horses do not have to their credit. He won an allowance race at Aqueduct in April, then he ran second in the Monmouth Cup Stakes, and then his third place in the Forgo, which was won by Cody's Wish. Early on, you see him look Jackie's Warrior in the eye, and I think you kind of see the rider on Jackie's Warrior be like, "Wait a minute, there's a horse over there. I actually have to ask my horse to go a little bit." I mean, I think one of the things about Jackie's Warrior is that he's just so fast early, and he does have that gate speed. And so to see another horse like Pipeline kind of soften him up early, and it's not as though he completely evaporated late. I think that it was kind of that tag team effort a little bit that assisted Cody's Wish with getting
Hmm.
by Jackie's Warrior late in that spot. Obviously, a huge upset considering that Jackie's Warrior was such a short price favorite in there. But I think there's a little bit of upside with Pipeline. I think that going toe to toe early with a horse like Jackie's Warrior really adds to his credibility. And I just feel like he's probably going to get an aggressive ride from that inside post 3. He's going to show some early speed. We know how well early speed does at Keeneland, and I think that the price is right to maybe take a little shot with this horse.
Yeah, the Forgo was a big effort. It's a bit of a weird race just because they didn't go crazy fast, right? For 7 furlongs. Like, I mean, they went honest, 22 and 3. I guess I just didn't seem like they were going crazy fast, but they were looking each other in the eye. And to me, that always ends up being a little more demanding than just flat out flying. Obviously, if you're flat out flying with somebody looking you eye, that's the worst case recipe. But 22 and 3 versus a Jackie's Warrior, going at it to 45 and a half, to me always feels more demanding than going 44 and 3 but doing it on your own. And so the fact that he was in the race mid stretch, and it was just the Cody's Wish kind of grinded him down. And I don't dislike Pipeline at all. And obviously Top Connections, I'm a big Flavian Pratt fan, so I'm always taking note where and why he ends up on a certain horse.
All right. Well, I like your stamp of approval from my pick in here. Cody's Wish, your favorite. I suppose we should discuss this deserving favorite in this spot after the upset of Jackie's Warrior in that Grade One Forgo that was aforementioned. Going out for Bill Mott. He's 5 to 2 on the morning line. It's a great story. It's a really feel good story about why he got his name as a foal. And I've seen him in person. He's a very handsome looking horse. He's run well this year. He's really improved lately. Does he have another step forward in him? He's not entirely pace compromised. He's not like a dead set closing sprinter, but he's not going to be in front early.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I to me the two turns is, I guess, the question mark for him. He's done it a couple times at Saratoga in a maiden race, and he ran okay, but he was 3 to 5 that day and got beat by 5 lengths. And then at Tampa, we saw him in the Challenger Stakes, and I thought he was a winner in the Tampa race. Scalding, who was to his inside, kind of kicked back at him, and it almost made me think that maybe the distance was a little bit of question. That was a mile and a 16th, I believe. And so it's obviously a little bit of a different race, but 40, 50 yards more. And, but I thought it was noteworthy just because it did look like at the 3/16 or the eighth pole that he was kind of going to go by, and he just didn't. So I think if you're trying to play against Cody's, I mean, and by the way, I think he's a different horse then. That was kind of his ascension really started after that race with the cutback. But I think if you're trying to go against him, it's because A, he's going to be a shortish price, and B, the two turns is maybe a little bit of question. And as you said, if speed is playing as it could, then he might be a little bit of a pace disadvantage, and it is a short stretch, right? So I think that for those races, at least it feels like you generally want to be within shouting distance, turning for home, and really, really close by the time you kind of straighten away.
I agree with you. There's also horses that we have in this field that we haven't touched on yet that are cutting back in distance. Were any of them on your radar for this race?
Yeah, Cyberknife was. I maintain he has some talent. Part of me worries that maybe he's kind of getting to the end of a tough campaign. The last couple starts have not been all that great, and I think we see that with a lot of 3-year-olds, right? Like they go through that whole grind and they just tail off a little bit at the end. And at the higher levels, tailing off just a little bit can mean 5, 6, 7 lengths, which is the difference between winning or running fourth. In the Pennsylvania Derby, he kind of followed Taba a little bit, just sitting in behind that horse. But to me, it seemed like the rail and inside were very good on Pennsylvania Derby Day. And I know Taba won shifting to the outside, but he had that inner track the entire way. And so once he did kick out, Cyberknife just kind of followed him. But unfortunately, Taba was running away from him at the time. And so, but he's just a horse where I think that the cutback maybe works to his advantage. I do think he's got some ability. And if he is, not exhausted from the big campaign. And maybe he's one that gets forgotten a little bit. I just think that Gunite and Laurel River, because of Baffert and because he's coming in very good form, I think is going to take a fair bit of money.
You also have the Irad Ortiz Jr. betting factor as well,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Irad getting on this horse too. Kind of his coming out party last time out in the Pat O'Brien Stakes. A little bit of a surprise. I mean, but I will say that field versus this field, I'm a little suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, American Theorem, I think, was the second place finisher. I thought that the horse that was the favorite in there, I'm looking for my notes here, was the Saffy Joseph horse. Um,
Oh, Speaker's Corner.
Speaker's Corner. I thought he was one of the worst favorites at even money we've seen in a while. I mean, a horse who
Yes.
has been kind of doing the tail off toward the end of a long campaign, and I just think he was just the name in the race, so people bet it accordingly. But American Theorem, who was second, is a nice horse. American Theorem had to go out 4 wide, and Laurel River got like a perfect split at the top of the stretch, and so I thought things definitely went that horse's way. But as you said, there's going to Baffert and Irad, that horse is going to take a lot of money, and this does feel like a significantly more difficult field. Whereas a horse like Cyberknife, I think, is actually running against an easier field. It's a different race, but
With Cyberknife, where do you expect him to sit early? Because I feel like in the Travers, it's not as though he wanted to be on the lead. He kind of just
yeah,
inherited that role, having to be the one that went to set those early fractions. And then in the Haskell, he was sitting behind the pace and he got that split right up the rail for that win there. Where would you want him to be sitting if he was your horse in this race?
I think he's going to end. I mean, first of all, the draw, as you said, drawing outside is going to maybe force Florent's hand to either send a little bit or to sit back. I would think that he will find his way a little bit further back. His best races all seem to be where he's kind of employing that kind of good third, fourth stalking position. And so, I mean, ideally, I think that's where he wants to be. I just don't know that there's just a fair bit of other speed in a race like this and that run to the first turn. Keeneland, I don't think more so than other tracks. Maybe it just seems like that optically, but when they go into that first turn, it really seems to thin them out from inside to out. You'll see them a lot of times go 3 or 4 stacked across into that turn, and within 7 or 8 jumps, they've really strung out because they just that inside path kicks away. And I have a little bit of a weird theory on Keeneland too. And it probably affects the first turn as much as the second, but when they come into the stretch, it seems like the going from turn to straightaway is less rounded off there. It's more of a straight thing. So it just seems like inside path horses kick away just a touch because of that, because they start running straight while the horses on the outside are still turning. And again, I don't know if it's an optical thing or what. And as an announcer, I look for stuff like that. And so it just seems that those inside paths get a little bit of an extra boost from maybe the sharpness of coming in and out of the turn.
That's an interesting theory, and honestly, I'd be inclined to believe it because of the way that we've seen the post positions be so biased for this particular distance where you do want to be inside. So that checks out and makes sense to me. Um, there's a lot of people, and by a lot of people, I mean maybe one person that I know that's really interested in simplification.
I was hoping
Uh,
you would say that.
okay,
Let,
tell me
let,
about
the,
it.
let there be two people that are interested in simplification.
Okay, there
Now,
might be three.
yeah. Well, first, I mean, he was my Derby pick, so
Oh, okay.
and I try to never be sentimental about horse, but mid stretch at 35 to 1, I was thinking we had a
You
shot
were
there.
yelling. Yep.
Yeah, and so he's not run well since then, but the Pennsylvania Derby, he was kind of in the mix there. And again, my argument is that race is maybe a little bit better than this race in terms of the top end. Taba and Zandon, I think, would be very shortish prices. Again, the distance is a different story, so maybe it's a different race. But if Cyberknife is going to be 5 to 1, and he was ahead of this horse, and this horse was kind of in the outer path, which he was sitting in the 2 or 3 path for a lot of that race. Um, I just think that at a big price, he's one that can sneak in, and if he's forwardly placed, where he's a horse who's very versatile in terms of running style. And I've kind of argued that I think he's actually best coming from a little bit off of it. And so they cut, but they did that in the Preakness and the West Virginia Derby, and it didn't necessarily work out. So, um, because I think his Mucho Macho Man effort was very good. So obviously everybody thought he was a front running horse, and then he had that horrible start in the Holy Bull and still made a pretty good run. And then in Fountain of Youth came from well off of it. So I think he's best as a closer. He draws kind of snugly toward the inside, and maybe that does help keep him a little bit more forward. Again, it's so much easier and more fun to make cases for horses when they're going to be 15 to 1.
Especially when they get an advantageous inside draw, and
Yeah.
I've done my process of elimination to get rid of a horse like Cyberknife within my ticket. If you take out one that's 9 to 2 and you're comparing one that's 15 to 1, that definitely is a better and more enticing argument there.
Well,
The last
and oh, real quick,
one,
Sarah, with slow down Andy to the inside too, like he's going to send right from the rail spot at 30 to 1, and so and Pipeline kind of wants to go. So I'm hoping simplification just lets the inside horse go, slips right in behind him, and just follows him. Now, obviously, he might get stuck if they duel, and then he's boxed in down there. But that's in my perfect world, he sits down on the inside in behind maybe 2 or 3 other horses, and swoops some wins, and then I get to red board on Twitter.
well, it's not really red boarding if you talked about it beforehand, and everyone's going to watch this video, so they'll know
Good
that you
point.
are interested in simplification before the fact. Slow down Andy gives me heart palpitations. The way this horse moves is just like I feel like he's going to fall over.
See, I'm bad about watching that. So I watch, especially as a race caller, we're watching the jocks and the silks and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So one of my strengths is not how the horses are traveling, even watching them as a race goer. In fact, when they were talking about Jack Christopher and the reason for the scratch, I was like, really? I mean, I didn't. It's just something that didn't enter my radar.
He has Jack Christopher has a very choppy way of trotting
Hmm.
around that kind of makes him look like if you imagine someone elderly at the grocery store that's just like it, they're not a fluid mover.
Yeah.
But if he goes faster, he actually looks fine. So
Hmm.
it's just kind of one of those weird things about him specifically that I actually tweeted about it the other day. I was like, if you look at him for the first time, you're like, what's up with this horse? But if you
Yeah.
know that this is his normal and we've seen what he can do and that's just how he is, then that's just who he is and that's fine. But slow down Andy, I mean, he looks like he's chopping in front, he looks like he's all over the place, just limbs are flailing about, but obviously it works for him and that's his normal as well. The other price horse in here that I know a couple people are a little bit interested in, and this is a horse that I've liked in different spots, but I'm not sure if I like in this spot. That's number 4, Law Professor.
Hmm.
Gave Life is Good a little bit of a scare there in the woodwork off track. And I had played a pretty hefty straight exacta. And for a second, I was like, oh man, did I forget to box this? Because that would be terrible. But didn't work out that way.
I mean, I thought he was going to win. I just flat out thought he was going to beat him. We see that with those really good horses. It seems like you'll see a horse take a crack at him on the turn, and they usually don't get to about their neck where the good horse will kick back and be like, okay, you were close enough. And I mean, I law professor got cozied up right up alongside, and I'm actually pretty interested in him. And he's won a 2 horse race or 2 turn mile before. It was a grade 2, but it was an off the turf event. But if he puts in another run like that and gets maybe the pace scenario, I mean, I think one of my fascinations with pace handicapping is just how we will handicap a race based off of what we think is the pace, and then it can turn into something completely different. And so, trying to figure out what will happen into that first turn, who's going, who's not, and how fast they're going to go, is always going to be very interesting to me. But Lopez, I mean, if he puts in another run like that, surely he's a hit the board candidate at minimum.
And at 20 to 1, I mean, there's only three horses in here that are a bigger price than him. And I don't give any of them a serious chance. But
Yeah.
you're looking at the horse that has come the closest to Life is Good, who's uh, I don't think he's winning the classic, but some consider a very serious contender for the classic. I mean, I feel like with the price discrepancy, depending on what price he is, he's going to have to be included for me somewhere because if you respect Life is Good, you can't not use this horse a little bit in this spot.
What would life is good be in this race in terms of odds? I mean,
Don't you think
what
he'd be the favorite?
easily, I think. I think he'd be sub 2
Yeah,
to 1 for sure. And
right.
so, comparing it off that Life is Good was so funny because it's very rare that a horse wins a major Breeders' Cup Classic prep by more than an open length and loses respect and loses excitement about him. I felt like after that race, everybody's like, "Oh," and so it's. I mean, he's still. He didn't do anything wrong. It just wasn't flashy, and I don't think the number came back that great. But it's just, yeah, it's funny how we get opinionated on that. But yeah, I mean, I think Life is Good would be favored here, and it's same with the simplification for Cyber. I think you're going to get very discrepant odds on horses that aren't that far apart.
I'm with you. All right. Well, is there anyone else in this field that I feel like we haven't mentioned? I liked Senor Buscador last time. He was
Mhm.
one of my outrun the odds highlight horses. I don't like post 10 and that he's pace compromised and that he also just hasn't run a race that's fast enough yet against some of these horses. But um, third to Laurel River and then came back to win. So I mean, I guess that he deserves an argument if you like him, but he's not for me in this particular spot.
He's one of those horses I normally fall for. I love like small connections and I love the stories of those things, and so I'm very very guilty of falling into those traps. And there is some talent there. Like he does seem to just have some raw ability, and obviously he's had some setbacks and stuff like that. But um, yeah, I just if he wins, it's a happy story, and I'll shake my head and good job, guys, but not for me.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much covers the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Do you have a top pick?
I mean, I suppose it's simplification at this point, just based on the price and everything. But obviously, it kind of depends on how things are playing. And um, yeah, him or Cyberknife, but obviously the price is better on him, so I'm gravitating that way.
All right, I'll hold you to it.
Please do.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about this Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile with me. We'll see you at Tampa next. I feel like that's the next place we'll see you calling the races. Well,
Yeah,
hear you.
I'm here in beautiful Clearwater, Florida, right now. We start in 2.5 weeks, so the day before Thanksgiving.
All right. So people can tune in to Tampa Bay Downs to hear your magnificent race calls. And thank you for taking the time to chat.
Appreciate it. Thank you.